So I'm Jeremy Grotenhuis. I write under Jeremy A. Grotenhuis or JT Greathouse. I've had short fiction published in Beneath Ceaseless Skies, Intergalactic Medicine Show, Writers of the Future, and Deep Magic. Mostly write fantasy. I'm also a social studies and English teacher, and I taught geography 1 year, which is part of why I decided I wanted to do this panel, because I like geography. And I've been given permission by my agent to tell people that my first novel just sold a couple weeks ago. Yeah, I can't say anything more than that, but I can say it's sold. So, yeah.
Congratulations.
That's huge.
I know, I'm still riding the high.
Is it going to be a map?
I haven't drawn a bad map for it, and hopefully the publisher will make a better one.
That is probably one of the things to talk about.
Henry, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Henry Leanne. I am a speculative fiction writer concentrating on middle grade fiction right now. I am the author of the P. Sprout Chen middle grade fantasy series.
Awesome. So we do have another panelist who's Marie Croak is supposed to be joining us, but I do not see that she's here yet, so she might be having some technical problems. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. The plan is we're going to talk about some of the topics that we discussed earlier in the emails that we exchanged, and also some other things that I jotted down. And then at 30 minutes, we're going to do some audience Q&A, just so Henry has some time to participate in that before he has to leave us early, sadly. So I think the first question that I want to ask to kind of get us started is, why do we love maps in fantasy novels and in science fiction and fantasy more broadly? Is it just because Tolkien did it and so we all are just endlessly aping him? Or is there something to having a map with a novel that adds to it in a meaningful way? And let's start with Marie.
All right. I mean, I think that you can't discount the influence of, yes, this incredibly famous book did the map thing, and lots of people thought, okay, if I want to do what he did, I need a map. That's certainly, I think, a chunk of it. But I think more broadly, there's both kind of the emotional and the pragmatic aspects to having a map that, you know, these stories are trying to take us away to a different place. And so on the one hand, a map is a tool to help people imagine that place and to think about, you know, where things are in it and how they relate to each other. So it is both pragmatically useful, and it also helps create that feeling of verisimilitude, that this is a place that exists because there are maps of it. So I think it is a useful tool in those respects, and we're not only doing it because a standard got set early on.
I agree with the idea of verisimilitude. I mean, one of the things that we are drawn to in science fiction and fantasy is the idea of a built world and invented culture. And there are many things in the worlds that we write about that we cannot replicate. We cannot replicate the buildings. We cannot replicate the magical objects. We cannot replicate many other things. But we can replicate the map. So the map kind of acts as something to extrapolate from. It's saying, if this is as vivid and as fully imagined as it is in their world, then this is an artifact from their world. And just extrapolate out and assume that everything else is that fully imagined. But I mean, to say the obvious, we are writing to create transporting experiences and transporting experiences that move us out of our own shared reality. And so any kind of aid, I think, helps. And science fiction and fantasy tends to be a very visual literature. So I think it all makes sense that we are drawn to maps in science fiction and fantasy.
Yeah, that sounds correct to me. This Porthos Presenter 5, this is our fourth panelist, Marie Croak. I hope I'm saying that right. Once you get everything set up, just go ahead and cut us off and introduce yourself. I think that, like, you both are hitting on something key, which is that adding a map.
I unmuted you.
Oh, awesome, Marie. So go ahead and introduce yourself.
So you can hear me now, right?
We can, yes.
Okay. Did you want me to introduce myself? I know I just cut you off. I'm sorry.
Yes, please.
Okay. My name is Marie Croak. I'm a Writers of the Future winner, and my science fiction and fantasy stories have been published in Beneath These Skies and Daily Science Fiction, and most recently Dreamforge magazine. And that's about it.
Nice. So the question that we were just talking about, if you want to add your thoughts, is why do we like maps in fantasy novels? What do they add other than it just being sort of a convention that Tolkien started?
Okay, so I missed what some people have said, so if I
That's okay.
repeat some things, I apologize. I do think some of it has to do with that sense of wonder that we all have, even from a really young age, that it just excites us to go exploring across the world, because we don't get to go anywhere usually when we're really young. And then that sort of hinges into, as we get older and we get to experience these fantasy worlds and these science fiction worlds. And yeah, so some of it like kind of hinges back into that childhood feeling as well.
Yeah, totally. And I know for me as a young reader, one of my favorite series was the Redwall books by Brian Jacques. And part of the reason was because the maps in those books did a really good job of like transporting you to this world of Mossflower and Redwall. And I still remember seeing Salamandastron in the front of one of the books and being like, I don't know what that is, and I'm very excited to find out. So that kind of ties me into my next question for everyone, which is, what are some of our favorite maps in fantasy and why, and what makes them stand out?
I think I'm going to do the possibly slightly embarrassing thing and say that I just read the first of Henry's Pea Sprout Chen books, and I love the map that it has at the front of it. And the reason that I love it, actually, Henry, I don't know if you have the ability to share a picture of it, because otherwise I'm going to be reduced to like holding it up to my camera here.
I mean, I can when it gets to my turn, but I mean, I don't want it to be the Henry show.
Well, okay, you could show it in a moment, but the reason that I love it is that it's not just doing the practical thing of telling you, okay, here's where things are. It's the type of map that is drawn so that it is actually representing like the different buildings in this academy that it is a map of. And so the minute you open it up, you're getting a visual detail that says, okay, this is the kind of world you should be imagining. And the names on it are also telling you something useful, because when I open something that has, you know, the Courtyard of Supreme Placidness and the Palace of the 18 Outstanding Pieties, I know something about what kind of world I'm getting into. And it's just a beautiful art object in its own right. And so I'm going to name off that one as being something that does its job very effectively on about 4 different levels at once.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now I want to read those books.
You should.
I could actually hinge into that as well, because two of the maps that I wanted to talk about were actually Wizard of Oz original series maps and Dinotopia, both of which do similar things to what Henry's map then did, which is they give you words in the language that you can understand that create this sense of, wow, what is that place, and what it might be actually could be something that you could imagine, versus being sort of a homogeneous words that were thrown together that don't really have any meaning to the reader who first opens up the book and doesn't have any introduction to the world yet. And so the words don't necessarily mean anything. Whereas if you have a map like Henry's and like Dinotopia and even Tolkien's to some extent, those words automatically will make you start wondering about these other places.
I'm going to be completely unoriginal and say that it was one of the Tolkien maps that influenced me the most, and it was from The Hobbit, actually. I actually never finished Lord of the Rings, could not get into it, but The Hobbit rocked my world so hard. And that map at the front in the end papers of The Hobbit, it was powerful for reasons that I didn't understand until later in life. And one of the things is they had teasers as to what was going to happen in the story. There's the forest, and then there's that one little line, there are spiders, which becomes an Easter egg later on after you've read the book, which is very delightful. But I'm looking at it, I was an art dealer for 10 years, and so I got more of a visual sense, and I was starting to understand how the graphic design decisions of that map helped create a sense of place. It had this woodcut feel, which was unusual for the 50s or whenever it came out. You wouldn't have expected that. Not that they didn't have woodcut style graphic design, but that immediately said, that immediately gave it a patina of age that was very transporting. And so the graphic design decisions that went into that map subconsciously fed into its power for me, even as a 6-year-old kid. So that one was the one that made me fall in love with maps at first. But there have been many, including the one that Marie mentioned, the Dinotopia maps. Dinotopia is all about the place. It is, Dinotopia, the terrible place, and the place is the star more than the dinosaurs. So that map was a wonderful one as well.
Nice. All great examples. So part of what we want to talk about here isn't just why do we like maps, but how do we make them, right? How do we use geography and cartography to make these things to supplement our own stories? So the first question on those lines I want to ask is, when you're designing a map for your world, what are you thinking about? What do you take into consideration? And what's your process?
Far too much of my process is write a whole bunch of stuff and then realize, oh crap, I need to figure out where these things are, and then attempt to draw something that will make coherence. I've already said, possibly having to rearrange stuff. Actually, I seem to have lost the thing for sharing my screen. If I could get that back, I'm going to show a quick example. This will be
Henry, you might be able to right-click her name and make her the presenter if Tiffany isn't able to.
I have gotten the option to show my screen. So are you guys
There we
seeing
go.
that yet? Okay. So here you go. Here's a lovely, gorgeous map for the ages that people are totally going to remember and talk about. This is for The Mask of Mirrors, the book that I'm co-writing with Ellis Helms, or have co-written. And this mess that you see over here is because we had a general sense of the layout of the place, and that was fine. We knew we had the upper bank, we had the lower bank, we had the old island, we'd placed various things. And then there were a few districts that we basically tried to put them all in the same place. Like they were all somehow on the river, near the bridge, all at the same time, and that just didn't work. And so we had to go back and decide where exactly they were positioned and then go through and fix our text to correctly reflect where they were located and so forth. So this really was the, okay, try to retrofit a map to what you've described, find the places where that doesn't work, and then fix the text to fit the map. And part of the reason I wanted to show this is because it is kind of hideous. Like those are ships, can you tell? Just mark, but that's where a lot of the shipping docks in the river. That, it is very easy to get caught up in the idea that, oh, I have to make this map and it's got to be gorgeous. But no, you only need to make something for your own purposes that will help you know what is where and how these things fit together. And as long as you have that in whatever hideous form you make it, that is sufficient. If you wind up with a map in the book, this is when you hand your hideous sketch off to the publisher and they find an artist. So like it can be a fun form of cat waxing if you want to do it for like, oh, well, I should draw a pretty map for my book, but don't let that stop you from actually moving forward.
Yeah, the map for the book that just sold doesn't look much better than that one, right? I totally relate to just dashing off something and just using it to track locations.
And I will note in passing, I have also done scribbled maps. Like if I'm writing a complex fight scene, there have been times where I have drawn a map for the fight, and this is never going to go in the book. And this is valuable in the same way that the general map is valuable. That imagine you write a thing and you know where everything is. You're fine. You've got a clear image. Are you going to remember that 6 months from now? Are you going to remember that a year from now? Like this is also to help yourself when you come back and go, okay, wait, I need to revise the scene, but I need to do it in a way that doesn't destroy the coherence here. Having a visual aid is useful for that.
Yeah, Henry, did you, or Marie, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add on to that one of the stories that I once wrote was in an apartment complex. And so when I was in the middle of writing it, I ended up not knowing where everybody was located in the apartment complex, and I kept putting way too many people on one floor. So I had to do the same thing and craft a map of every single layer to say, okay, would they actually talk to each other in the stairwell, or would they never even, use the same stairwell? So yeah, I did the same thing.
I like the idea of apartment complexes because apartment complexes are kind of like multi-dimensional spaces in that the layout is identical on each layer of it, but you can flip up in another dimension, and then suddenly it's populated by completely different stories and people. And so I would imagine that would actually, even though it seems like a simple layout that would require mapping.
Cool.
I'd like to answer the question.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Regarding map creation. So if I can get the screen share superpower back again, that would be great.
There you are.
I guess we handed off baton to baton. Is that how it works?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think so. You should have it now.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna tell you something that's gonna make you very, very jealous, and that is that I live 2 subway stops from Universal Studios Hollywood, and before lockdown, I got a season pass, and I used the 3 broomsticks in Hogsmeade Village as my writing cafe, and so I was sitting in this. I don't know if you've ever been to it, but it's not like other amusement park environments. It is so compelling. They brought in tons of Scottish soil and smeared them over all the buildings just to get the right patina on the building. There's faux allure on the Victorian signs. I don't know how they did it. So it's a very, very convincing environment. But I kept in my mind the anecdote that J.K. Rowling's map looks like crap. The map of Hogwarts looks like crap. And I'm sitting here writing in this incredibly convincing illusion that came from a map that was crap. And so I gave myself permission at first to create a map for my publisher that was crap. But as I was writing the book, as Marie was saying, the fight scenes in my books. Let me back up. My books are about kung fu figure skating, and they take place at an academy that teaches this art form that combines kung fu with figure skating. And I realized that because I didn't want this to be wacky and to just utterly throw physics out the window, there were certain limitations in the plot. Distances that people could jump from one building to another. How many tiers are they? How much damage on your skate would you suffer falling from tier 3 to tier 5? All these questions that came up. And the more questions that came up, the more I realized I can't do a crappy J.K. Rowling map, and I have to know the proportions of everything. So what I did was I drew. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So I drew an overhead with the footprint of everything on the academy. And it was kind of critical, but you see at the top, I don't know, can you see my cursor moving around?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You see these tracks. These are rails that go across open water, and they never take a straight line to the destination. So if you want to get to the conservatory, from the principal island to the conservatory of Wu Liu, you've got to make this hairpin curve around and get there. And the reason for that actually shows the values of this academy. This is a very, very select academy, and those rails are over open water, and the students have to navigate them just to get to class. So if they fall off the rails and into the water, they've just proven in front of all of their peers and all of the teachers that maybe they don't belong here. So it's trying to convey the values of this place with the map. And then the further that I went, there were all these particular action sequences that required very, very specific distances. So, I mean, you see the scale down there. That scale is 5 li, which is about 1.55 miles, because there were certain action sequences that required somebody to skate on just one stroke of their skate, for example. So it ended up being so much more complicated than I wanted it to be. But I was very happy that they took this and they didn't say, you're nuts, we're not going to do anything like this. But they took this and they had an artist do a 3D version of it. Can you see the next picture?
Yeah, that's the one I was talking about.
Yeah, so yeah, that's the map Marie was talking about. So I mean, she did a beautiful job with this, but then we had to sit down and I said, no, they would never place that right there because then the feng shui is very bad. You've got a pathway right into the front of that building. That means in feng shui that that path is like a dagger cutting into the good look of that building. You've got to alter that path. And look, there are 4 windows on that side. You cannot have the number 4 because the number 4 sounds like the word for death in their culture. So we just kept digging deeper and deeper and deeper into it. But I realized as I was going through this process that I liked having control. So the next image, this is a Photoshop mock-up of one part of the world. And this was for a companion story that was in Asimov's, and this is going to be the cover. So I realized I didn't want to just ship it off to an artist and have them interpret. I knew exactly where everything needed to be. So I did this Photoshop mock-up, and they hired an artist at my recommendation to let me get the next image, to paint that. Oh, no, it didn't go. Here we go. There, so there's the actual painting that was the cover of Asimov's. But I realized I needed to be a good host. I was inviting people to come and play in my own private Disneyland, but it didn't look like anything that that even my books could really convey, because we didn't have a lot of reference points for it. So I had to be a good host, and that meant I had to do a lot of the imagining myself. So I ended up being very, very hands-on, and this took dozens and dozens of hours, but I'm really happy with how it came out. And the flip side of it is that that was just for the first book. By the time I wrote the second book, I realized, okay, I've got a great tool here. The series takes place almost entirely in one location of about 280 acres. So it's a school campus, very, very contained. But that meant that I could play out intricate choreography for action sequences that took advantage of the placement that I could see on the map for the first time that I couldn't before I did this work. So it ended up actually influencing the way that I wrote the sequel to the first book.
That's great.
Yeah, so I mean, I wanted to do a map that just served my own purposes, but then I realized that my own purposes were complex and demanding and multiplying.
Sweet. That's a really good story, because it also ties into how the map kind of ends up supplementing the story in ways you didn't expect initially, right? And I did have a question written down along those lines, which is, how can writers use a map to supplement their story without creating a situation where the reader has to flip back and forth between the text and the map to track where the characters are? There was a book, I don't even remember what it was, but I was in high school and I have this very clear memory of reading a book and having to stop and go, wait a second, where are they? And then having to go back to the map and like find that spot to make any sense of what was going on at that moment in the narrative. So how do you avoid causing that problem while still using your map in an effective way? And we can start with Marie B to keep the trend going.
Okay. I mean, honestly, I think if it's if the reader's having to look at the map, then I sort of feel like you have failed as a writer, in part because you can never be sure that you will get to have a map. This is something that costs money for the publisher to put into the book. And so you can't assume you will have that. You cannot rely on it. And you don't want your reader to be stopping in the middle of your thrilling narrative to flip to a map. So I think it should be something that is a supplement that people can go look at it. They can appreciate the beauty of it. It might sort of, show them cool details and such. But in no way can it be a load-bearing element of the story. And if you treat it like that, then you're not holding up your end as a writer, is basically my feeling on it.
Yeah, Marie C or Henry, either of you have anything to add on that?
All of that's really good. And I would say that your job as the writer then would be to make sure that you have all those directional words in the story, so that all those references are just embedded in every single scene, using enough descriptive words to make sure that you know what are you looking at each place that you are.
And I think also kind of along those lines, making sure that the names for the locations are distinct and memorable, so that your reader doesn't have to like look at the map to remember where all the places are and how they're related. If they remember them because they have good names, like in the Redwall books, or from what I've seen so far, Henry's books, it's not going to be too hard for them to track. Did you have anything else to add, Henry?
I thought about the idea of childhood, and I don't know who said this. I think it was François Truffaut, but I have not been able to track it down. But the quote was that we are only ever former children. And so I remembered my own experience of exploration as a child. And I grew up in a suburban environment, but to me, it felt quite rural and wild. And I think that the reason was that the scale of my exploration was quite small, a yard, one interesting dead tree that could fill my afternoon. And so that's something that I kept in mind as I was writing. And as Marie said, it is, and answering some of the questions for the audience, you cannot count on your publisher paying for a map. So you do have to give, and like Marie C was saying, you do have to give directional assistance in the actual prose. But the way that I negotiated that is I realized, like Jeremy was saying as well, that the particular location should be memorable. And if its relation to other locations is important, find a way to work that in, but don't sacrifice the experience of that one location, because that's what childhood felt like for me. It was exploring that one dead tree for the entire afternoon. And that one dead tree mattered more than where the tree was located. So that was that macro micro going, zooming in, zooming out, was something that I kept in mind as I was writing to anchor us in the sense of place.
Yeah, that sounds right. And I want to echo what you're saying in terms of it's important to, I think if somebody's flipping back to a map in the front of your book to figure out where they are, they have lost interest in what you're talking about in the moment. You've lost that sense of exploration of that location they're in now, because they need to go back and figure out the relationship between where they are and where they've been. So moving on.
There's just something I wanted to loop back to from earlier that Marie C had mentioned, having like some maps that you look at them and the names and things that you're seeing on the map are like evocative and they make you interested and they catch your attention, whereas others you open them and you're like, here's a bunch of made up names. Meh, like they don't mean anything to me yet. And I think that's an interesting point, because there's sort of this intersection between the geographical world building and the linguistic world building of the story. And I mean, partly this is, you get some authors where they put like 20 locations on the map and only 3 of them actually matter to the story. And so the rest of it's just clutter to me. But some of it's also things of, you know, if things are named with English phrases, like, you know, you get that on Henry's map, some of the place names in the city that Alyssa and I created, their English names are like English words put together for the names. And so that's going to carry meaning for the reader. Or if I see a map where it's clearly showing like different countries and there's a visible linguistic difference between them, then I start going, okay, I can see that you have different countries, different cultures here, and that means something to me. But if it's 20 names that are just sort of like generic fantasy letters thrown together, then it's, it doesn't mean a lot. Not until I've read the story, at least.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I was just going to add.
Much as I like, oh, go ahead.
Oh,
This is
sorry.
your 20-minute warning. You have, I believe, 20 minutes until the end of the panel.
I was just going to add to what Marie B was saying, was I know this is kind of cheating to use Tolkien, but I feel like Tolkien did that really well in that you had some English names like Lake Town and the Shire, which immediately you understand them. And then you have the Elvish names like Lothlorien that are completely different. And so it kind of adds to that sense of, okay, what is that place? Because it's not like some of these other names.
Yeah. All right, so I want to get to some audience questions just so that we have some time to answer them before Henry sadly has to leave us a little early. So the first one, we have a question from Ben, which is, at what point in the publishing process do you share your maps? Did you send one with your manuscript when agent hunting, or did your agent send it out to acquisition editors, or is it all just in your head until the publisher asks for one? So in my case, I don't think my agent's seen my map.
Yeah, my experience has been that is a question that comes up after the book has been sold, and not at any point prior to that. You know, I don't think most agents would look on it as a positive, or most editors, if, you know, your manuscript showed up with a map attached to it. In part because, like, sure, if you're a great map artist, like, awesome, but it would sort of be like sending a drawing of one of your characters along with it. You're probably not going to do that.
Yeah, I agree. It probably is not going to impress people that you have imagined the geography and the world in that way. They're going to assume that you know where everything is, and unless there is some there is some value in the map itself aesthetically. I mean, if you happen to be an illustrator, for example, but even then they don't like it. So I think the thing is that you can share this. Depends on your agent. I've got an agent whom I'm very close with, who was a dear friend, and I just vomit everything onto her. I had so much to share. I had the map. I had a song, a theme song to go with it. I had Asimov's cover, I just said, look at all this. Oh my gosh, look at all this. And she said, okay, we won't share that yet, but I am so glad to know that this is a built world. So, I mean, I think the agent will be the gatekeeper for you if you have that kind of a relationship with the agent, but don't be surprised if they don't end up sharing it, at least at the outset.
Awesome. Marie, did you have anything to add, or should we move on to the next question? Okay, so next question. This one is from Sarah. It's, do you create the maps ahead of time, or do you create them as you draft?
I definitely create as I draft.
A bit of both. It depends on the story. Pretty much everything with the Brook and Rose trilogy, because I was working with another writer, Alyssa and I had to be much more upfront and explicit about things than we would be separately, because we could not, in fact, telepathically link our brains and make knowledge transfer without effort. But we also knew going into that, the whole trilogy is taking place in a specific city, and we wanted the strong sense of place that I think has come up a couple times during this. And so, yeah, from the start it was, okay, it's this city at the head of a river delta, there's an island in the middle of the river, the upper bank, the lower bank. We have the broad geography of it from the start, because that was key to then the social politics of the city. Like, the upper bank is not in any way at a higher elevation, but it's where the richer people live, and the lower bank is the poorer side of the city, and so on. So the geography and the social structure of the city were interlinked from the beginning.
I would say that for me, it was a combination. I started out doing something that, like I said, I was hoping to be able to do a bit more improv and be looser with this, and so I actually started out just following sound, which sounds like a strange way to map out geography, but I would say, you know, we've traveled 3,000 li from Gaofeng Mountain to the Purple River, or something like that. And then suddenly I've locked in a piece of geography now. And so I would have all of these things that were meant to serve as color, local color, but I ended up being committed to it, because there are gonna be smart readers out there that say, wait a minute, how can they travel in 3 days from Gaofeng Mountain to the Purple River if their technology is only at this level? So it ended up being this experiment in being free and liberated and being able to improvise just fell apart very quickly for me. I realized I did have to do all of that. I did have to front load all of that work.
Yeah, my experience is very similar, Henry. I started writing without much of a map. I had like 3 locations that I knew where they were in relation to each other, and then I had to add everything else to the map, just so I would not like repeat things or put stuff in the wrong place in the prose. So we have a very serious question that we need to ask before you leave, which is, will Henry sing his song for us? And if the answer is no, that's fine. We just want to know.
I will sing the song at my reading. I'm doing a reading tomorrow night. I don't have my instrument here with me right now. It's actually downstairs. And I haven't warmed up, but I will be warmed up for my reading tomorrow night. So if you can make it to that, I will do the song then. I'll do 2 songs. I'm going to do 2 songs, actually.
Well plugged.
You sing, you write songs, your ugly map is prettier than anything I've ever produced. We see how it is.
Next question from Kevin. Do you ever adjust maps to make them more plausible tectonically or climatologically? I don't.
Henry, can you give me back the presentation powers?
How do I do that?
The screen sharing powers. If you click on change presenter.
Change presenter. I see it. Okay.
Yeah.
Marie Brennan.
Mm-hmm.
Did that work?
So yeah, the Memoirs of Lady Trent. Main character is a scientist studying dragons, which meant there was a necessity to have her world hang together more kind of concretely than I necessarily required myself in other things. And people who have read the books, like there's a map in each book of the area that she's in. I've had people ask, is there a map of the whole world? I want to see how it all fits together. I'm going to show you the only existing map of the entirety of Lady Trent's world. Here you go.
Excellent.
That is the map. That was put together by some of you. Sorry, I need to not tab away from that, I suppose, because people are looking. Some of you may have seen a few years ago, there were some guys who did basically like a geological history of Westeros. They took the things that George R. R. Martin had described and tried to like figure out what the geology of that world would be. And I contacted them and I said, hey, can you help me out? And so here we go. We have a plate tectonic map of Lady Trent's planet because I needed it to hang together. But that is an exception. I am not normally going to those lengths. Climatologically, yes, because I want to be able to describe like the weather and the kinds of like things that grow there and what kinds of animals live there and so on. I actually do pay some attention to that. So like Nadejra, the city that I was showing before, it's basically at like the same latitude as Melbourne and it's coast. So like I drew on that a little bit, but the plate tectonic stuff only that one time.
I'm going to jump in on
Yeah.
plate tectonics because they actually play a huge part in my piece about Chen world. So there was this novelette that I wrote at Clarion West Writers Workshop, and my instructor, who was very supportive on that story, was George R.R. Martin. And the story was a foundational story for the Piece About Chen books. It was called The Great Leap of Shin, and it was the idea that on this continent there is going to be a great earthquake, a big one, like in California. But the problem is that the population is so large that anytime there's even a little earthquake, hundreds of thousands of people die, like actually in China. So there was this eunuch who was this great engineer for the emperor, and he realized it's not earthquakes that kill people. It's not even buildings falling down that kill people. It's not knowing when the buildings are going to fall down that kill people. So if you could schedule the earthquake, then you could warn the entire population to be outdoors, and you'd lose all the buildings, but you'd save all the people. And so they came up with this radical idea, studying plate tectonics, studying the frequencies that various substances vibrate at. And so they organized 200 million men to file up along the Great Fault Line, and they learned to jump in unison at a particular rate, and the rate would amplify and stack, and so eventually they would get enough propulsive force to trigger the earthquake. But the problem is that the earthquake was going to cause a tsunami that would wipe out the island country of Pearl, where the Piece About Chen takes place. So there's this mission to assassinate the eunuch to stop the Great Leap from happening. But I had to think very much. I did tons of research about plate tectonics, about how much force and how many nuclear weapons would be required to trigger something like the San Andreas fault line. How far would it have to be from the shore to cause a tsunami? Because usually tsunamis are caused by earthquakes that happen in the sea. And so I did do a lot of that. And I still don't know exactly where that fault line is, but I did end up having to alter the story and think a lot about the plate tectonics because I wanted to have it make sense and not cheat. So yeah, I'm so glad other people are thinking about the plates of the earth, because we are all living on them. Our views, our mountains, our landscapes are made by them.
Awesome. Henry, did you need to head out?
No, I need to get to my next one.
All right. Do you have anything you want to plug real quick before you take off?
No, this is a wonderful conference. I am loving this so much.
Thanks. All right. So Tiffany, if you could dismiss Henry so he can head to his next event, that would be awesome. There we go. We've got a couple more questions from the audience, and I feel like this is going pretty well, so we'll just keep rolling with those. The next one is from Demelza. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Do any of you use specific software for turning your rough sketches to life, or just trust the artist to do that? Having not yet had the opportunity to work with an artist, I have never trusted an artist to do anything. I have experimented with some softwares, and while other people talk, I'm going to try to bring them up so I can share them. So go ahead.
Should I give you presentation powers then?
Yeah, unless somebody else wants to share their screen before my turn comes.
All right, so do you have a thing you want to show, or?
Marisi? No? Okay.
Oh, no. The things that I might be mentioning actually might be what you mentioned as well, the applications, because
Okay.
I've used one that I got on beta, which is Wonder Drafts, which allows you to craft fantasy maps And there's a free one that's called, I think, Incarnate, that they're just applications that allow you to craft your own maps if you want to. For people like me who I'm not artistically inclined at all, and mine ends up looking pretty much like Marie B's when I'm done. So it's kind of a nice, it's a nice thing that you can use that has nothing to do with an artist. It just allows you to have something that if you wanted to use it on your blog or just as your own reference material, that it's possible.
Yeah, I know years ago I tried to play around with Campaign Cartographer, but this was more than a decade ago at this point, and it went into all kinds of stuff about like layers and such that I just am not sort of graphics program savvy enough to deal with those very much. So I, for the most part, haven't messed with them, though I did just order a book called How to Draw Fantasy Art and RPG Maps, Step-by-Step Cartography for Gamers and Fans. This is not software, this is, how to pick up a pencil and do it yourself, by Jared Blando, B-L-A-N-D-O. And it looks fairly good. It doesn't have too much of the draw, a box, draw a couple more lines, and poof, suddenly it's a fully illustrated thing that I think we all have encountered in the past.
Yeah, unfortunately, the software that I'm thinking of, I cannot find my link to it. It's something I used years ago for like, I think 3 novels ago. It's a procedural map generator. So what you can do is you can set parameters like size of continents and stuff like that, and then it'll just make something for you. And the idea for this book was like a huge world with massive political conflicts going on, and I didn't want to spend the time to like figure out where everything was by hand, and so I used this. And it was really cool, but the link that I have is broken, so I don't know if the tool even exists anymore.
Well, and it's interesting
that has been my
that you mentioned that as a time saver, because I think that the software can sometimes turn into a time sink as you figure out how to use all the tools and make everything pretty. And as with anything else, if you're having fun with that, awesome, but don't let it turn into, oh, but I can't work on the book yet because the map's not done.
Right. Yeah, no, this was very much I don't want to have to think about this, so I'm just going to have a computer do it for me, and then I'll use it however much I want to.
I've done sort of the cheap version of that. There's been a couple of times where I've seen maps of like, here's this speculation on what this no longer extant sea in, Earth's geologic history, like, here's what it looked like. And I'll go, okay, that's my map now. I'm stealing that. So like the Pannonian Sea is going to be what, this particular world of mine looks like or whatever.
Right on. We've got another audience question from Grace, which is, do you have any tips, thoughts, funny stories about naming places in maps?
That is a whole panel on its own.
I will say that a lot of times when you're trying to come up with names, and this is, well, maybe it's just me, but sometimes I'll just have the name be like, I don't know, mountain number 1, or mountain that is really obnoxious to get to, or things like that. And then I'll come back later and actually give it a real name. And sometimes it's like that. Yes.
There was certainly a fair bit of naming streets and districts and so forth in Nadezhra when Alyssa and I were writing, that in the book it would just be like square bracket with X in the middle. And it's like, we'll come back to that later. We will figure out what that's called. It's not worth stopping the scene for right now. I will say briefly, I am very much a proponent of some kind of quick and dirty figuring out what the language looks like if you're using things that are not built out of English words, to get like a coherent look to the names, rather than, I don't know, I just threw together some letters that look good that don't seem like they belong together at all. But that gets into a level of depth that we're not going to be able to answer in the time we have here.
Yeah, sadly, this is not a panel on conlangs.
Yeah.
Although that would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I did a thing on that for Clarion West recently, and it's a fun thing to talk about. But
yeah, I don't really. I mean, I do do the placeholder thing. I don't really have any funny stories. I do have awkward stories where I named something. I thought I was being clever and like using Welsh to create a place name, and then somebody who is more familiar with Welsh than I am read it and was like, that doesn't make any sense, and people who speak Welsh will be very confused, so I had to change it.
I have a trunk novel I haven't actually sold it, and it would need revision if I tried to sell it, but I wrote it right after having written my senior thesis on Viking weapons, and I was studying Old Norse for a little bit. And it's totally fine, like, for the book, but if it were to ever be translated into Icelandic or like Norwegian and Swedish, which are closely enough related, I'd probably have to change some place names because there's actual plot spoilers. Like, there's a place that's called the Place of Family that I'm like, yeah, that would just kind of give away this is where the character's going to find her family. Like,
yeah, that's a good point. Like, if you're gonna use a real language, keep in mind that if you're successful, your book might get translated into that language.
And dear God, if you're going to use a real language, use it correctly. I do some freelance writing for Legend of the Five Rings, which has some hideously bad place names from the earlier editions of the game. One place that the name gets translated into English is based on kind of historical Japan for the setting. It's the Castle of the Swift Sword, but in Rokugani, the language, it is Shiro Sano Ken Hayai, which I don't know why they replaced no with Sano. Shiro means castle, Ken means sword, Hayai means swift, and that is not how you put that together. Like, if you wanted to say, like, Swift Sword Castle in Japanese, it would be something closer to Hayato-jo. From Shiro, Ken, and Hayai, it turns into Hayato-jo. So, like, if you're going to use a real language, for the love of God, be respectful enough to use it correctly. Don't
just Google Translate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Recent editions
so
are better about it.
We've got just 2 minutes left. So if there are any final audience questions, I think we've gotten to all the ones that have been passed to me. That's awesome. But otherwise, if you guys have something you would like to plug, you can go ahead and do that.
I guess my plug would be I've got a Patreon called New Worlds that is all about world building, including geographical stuff and also linguistic stuff and also 8 million kinds of cultural stuff, which if you check out my site, which is swantower.com, you will find a link to the Patreon or just look for New Worlds Patreon. And there are also yearly book collections from the Patreon that I've been putting out so you can catch up on stuff.
Sweet. Marie?
I'll just plug that my latest story was out in Dreamforge, is last issue in December, I believe. And they're a new magazine, which is pretty cool, and they deal with a lot of hopeful fiction. So
nice. My only real plug at the moment is my Twitter, twitter.com/JeremyTEG. I will have more things to plug in like a year. But I don't right now.
I think, Maurice, I don't think you were here yet. He just told us he has sold his first novel.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm allowed to say that, but I'm not allowed to say anything more. Other than that, I'm doing a reading from that novel tonight at 11 p.m. con time, which is Central, 9 p.m. Pacific, whatever time that would be for wherever you are. And I will be reading the first chapter of that book, if you're curious. And that is our time.
I'm also reading the hour after he is, so at midnight con time, 10 p.m. Pacific time. So if anybody wants to come.
Awesome. All righty. Well, thank you guys. That was awesome. Very fun conversation, and looking forward to the rest of the convention.